When I was first diagnosed, I was in shock, devastated, and I think the strongest feeling that I had was feeling a loss of control over my own body and my own health. And later on, feeling like a whirlwind of how did this not get detected sooner?
Typically, it takes about 6 months to a year for a woman to be diagnosed with ovarian cancer from the first time she shows symptoms or the first time she has contact with her doctor.
Right now, ovarian cancer is diagnosed in those later stages, and that's one of the big reasons why ovarian cancer is such a deadly disease.
It's important to invest in early detection so that if you have early detection, then there's better chance to help people's health.
Ovarian Cancer Canada is a great partner for us because they're providing us with not only funding, but also patient perspective, that larger sort of global perspective on how our research fits in, really context for what we're doing. Now, ovarian cancer is really a problem, and it's different than other cancers. So often, if you develop cancer, you have a cough, you have a pain somewhere. We can, use imaging to actually identify where it is. The problem with ovarian cancer is that its symptoms are very diffuse.
One of the things I've heard from a lot of the patient partners that I've worked with is that they often had symptoms. They had bloating or some pain, and it was often misattributed to either menopause or other abdominal conditions.
One of the things that surprised me is how few women actually knew how prevalent ovarian cancer is and how there is no detection test.
So it can be very hard for them to come forward and basically have their physicians recognize that as sort of the pre-symptoms of cancer. And so it's really a situation where it's difficult then to enter into the process of actually being diagnosed. Worse, though, is that the process that we use for diagnosing ovarian cancer is actually not very efficient. So it's unfortunately the perfect storm of non-specific symptoms and difficult to diagnose. So that's why ovarian cancer is almost always diagnosed late. And that's really the problem with ovarian cancer, is that late diagnosis. Because of course, the women who are diagnosed late, they have a much poorer outcome. They have more symptoms, the disease is more difficult to treat, and more of them die. This project really comes out of research that we've been doing on blood tests for cancer. And it's very specific tests that we've developed for other cancers, but now applied to ovarian cancer specifically. And what happens is that when a cancer grows, a lot of the cells are actually dying. So even though it's growing rapidly, many of those cells are dying because the blood supply is very limited, and so the cells can't get oxygen or nutrition. So they die. And when they die, the DNA from those tumor cells actually gets released into the bloodstream. And what we've done is we've developed a test that actually detects those little bits of DNA from the tumor that are actually in the circulation. So when we take a blood sample out of a woman, we can look at that sample and say, okay, this particular DNA molecule actually came from a tumor, and say, okay, that woman has ovarian cancer based on this signature that we can see in the blood. One of the advantages of our test is that it actually is quantitative. So we can say, how much tumor does that woman have? Is it early on? Is it later? And particularly if it applies to their treatments. But it's really the early diagnosis that's the most important aspect here, because the disease is so much easier to treat when it's caught early.
Having the patient perspective could change something in how an early detection solution could be approved and adopted. Most screening programs aren't perfect, but having an early detection screening solution for ovarian cancer can save lives.
We know we can detect ovarian cancer in women who are diagnosed. What we don't know is whether we can actually detect it in women who haven't been diagnosed yet, but are undergoing that process. Funding from Ovarian Cancer Canada has really allowed us to take that next step, which is actually to look at patients, to allow us to go into those hospital settings and actually approach those women and get samples from them so we can actually test it in real life. So it's really about taking it from what's a laboratory-based experiment out into the real world, where we can actually find women who are being diagnosed and actually validate the test there.
The reasons why I wanted to participate in this particular project is really so that other women don't have to go through what I went through and what a lot of other women go through. And then I have a 23-year-old daughter, so I obviously think of her.
In order for our test to be acceptable, we really have to look at how it works. Does it perform the way we expect it to? Does it have the characteristics that we expect? We've done the validation in women who have cancer. So we know that, we take blood from women who have ovarian cancer, we can tell they have cancer, and the signal we get is very high. But the women that we're actually dealing with in this study have all sorts of other issues, benign growths, endometriosis, they could have a whole lot of other things. And this is why they're presenting with these nonspecific symptoms, because they're overlapping with the symptoms for ovarian cancer. So the question really is, can we not just detect ovarian cancer, but can we tell it apart from the things that these women are coming in for otherwise, that are basically hiding ovarian cancer? And so validating this is really very important for it to be something that can then be used in the public.
OCC has been an instrumental part to the work that we've been doing. The first thing that we did with some of the funding from OCC and their support is some final validation and some patient samples that were banked. And one of the big things we've been working on is the ethics approval to get our clinical study started. And we are going to be doing it over 2 years. So what's going to happen is women are going to come into the hospital with a suspicious ovarian finding, and they're going to be worked up throughout their standard diagnosis process. But when they first come in, we're going to be taking a blood sample from them, and we're going to see, can our test detect the disease, and we're going to compare it to what the current standard is. One of the other things that we're hoping to work on is look at treatment monitoring for these women. So once these women are diagnosed, are we able to monitor their treatment to make sure that it's effective? And if it's not, we can start making clinical changes. So overall, we're hoping that this test will be able to help women throughout the entire ovarian cancer patient journey.
Our early results really have shown that we can detect ovarian cancer extremely well. So in these women who have a diagnosis of cancer, we really can determine their levels are very high, which is unfortunate because it really indicates this is part of the problem, is that their levels in our test are almost the top of our range. So it indicates really that we have enough sensitivity that we can really detect women with much smaller tumor burdens, so much less tumor that's present in their body.
This really big difference between the two groups is letting us have a very accurate test. The really exciting thing is that we can go even earlier when the outcomes could be a lot better for these women.
A study like this, the focus is to find an acceptable screening process and get that approved by Health Canada and elsewhere in the world, and that really is the hope for the future young women out there.
I'm really proud to be part of the Dawn Ride, raising funds for this specific research. We get to learn about the exact project and progress of the project, and hopefully we'll be part of the project till the end, and we'll be able to see this early detection research come to fruition so that children don't have to grow up without mothers, and mothers don't have to lose their daughters.
The goal here is really to make a difference in women's lives. Ideally, we would use this as a screening tool, like women go for mammography, so we could say, okay, women over 50 or who have symptoms, a simple blood test every year or every 2 years could help them basically determine whether they have ovarian cancer, just like we do for mammograms. This research really matters because it can change the trajectory of a women's disease with ovarian cancer. And it's really how we turn something around, how we go from a disease that is almost always fatal to a disease that is actually easier to manage and treatable and curable.